Welcome to the Art of Using Your Personal Brand series, sponsored by the Personifi Group. Today's featured expert guest is Cindy Lumpkin, founder and director of Triumph Transition School. Cindy will share her personal story of how she triumphed through her learning disabilities to help others. Stay tuned for this next episode of the Art of Using Your Personal Brand. You don't want to miss it.
How are you?
I am doing well. How are you?
I am well as well, thank you. Just the craziness of the season.
Right. And so I really, of course, appreciate you coming in, doing the craziness of the season. But I'm so excited to have you as a guest today. Your story is so amazing. So amazing. We're going to give people just a few more minutes to join us. We got quite a few people coming on tonight. Thank you for resharing, reposting, inviting your friends to join us. But I'm really excited about you sharing your story. Like, I don't know if you know how amazing it is. I think about it often. It's amazing.
You know, I appreciate that. I think one of the things that's unique to most people, we typically don't see ourselves the way that other people sees us. You know, sometimes when we're living it, particularly when we are living life through difficulties and stuff, we don't always realize our own strength. That's definitely something that I am working more at, but I am tremendously humble that you find my story inspiring. That is my purpose to do that with it anyway. So
Absolutely. And, you know, I hope that even this experience will continue to encourage you and motivate you to, you know, to tell your story. I was even telling the kids, like, we're going to have Miss Cindy on. They're like, well, what is it? You know, they're excited because they're learning and growing. It sounds like she has an amazing testimony, and just how you taken your story and have multiplied it and affect generations. So yes, I mean, seriously, when you first started your school and just telling your story, I started reflecting on my story, you know? Yeah. So I was like,
that is, I'm sure we're going to get to this, but that is the power in telling our story.
Yes.
Other people permission to share their story. And one of the things that we have in common in this human experience is that we all have a story, and it's so worthy to share. It is.
Girl, I don't even have to lead this discussion. I told you, you got it. That is exactly what I lead with. You got to tell your story. And Cindy, you've been telling your story. So I just want, for those who are joining us, again, this is the Art of Using Your Personal Brand series. This is episode 3. Okay. And this is sponsored by the Personifi Group. The Personifi Group is a personal brand development firm. And what we personalize in and specialize in is helping people to discover their personal brand, because everyone was born with a personal brand. We teach you how to tell your story so that you can optimize, maximize, and monetize on your personal brand, a God-given gift that was given to you at birth. And so today's expert guest is none other than Cindy Lumpkin. She's the founder and director of Triumph Transition School, and she has an amazing testimony, an amazing story of how she used her story, tells her story, and now she's touching so many lives, so many children. Maybe even your child has been impacted, you know, by her school, by her testimony. So we are going to go in right now and get started, because we know it's the holiday season, and we appreciate everyone for tuning in tonight, a few days before Christmas. So Cindy, tell our viewers about your business. Tell us about Triumph Transition School.
Okay, actually, I can't tell you about Triumph Transition School without you about our parent structure, and that is Triumph in Life Inc. And Triumph in Life Inc. was born almost 15 years ago, and it's a nonprofit. And initially, we started as a mentoring program for students with learning differences. And you have heard me use that word a lot. And a lot of times people don't know what I mean when I say learning differences, but it's learning disabilities. But it's not only that, it's other people who may not fit into the square box that society has placed us in. And so out of Triumph in Life Inc. was birthed Triumph Transition School. And matter of fact, this is the perfect opportunity to also let you know that we're changing Triumph Transition School's name to Triumph School. So we're a little bit same wonderful service, but it is now called Triumph School. And basically,
Now,
go ahead.
no, I have to go back to the learning differences. Please expound on that because, you know, so many of us have learning differences. My son has a learning difference, you know, and we get caught up in this box.
Yeah.
So I really want you to talk about learning difference versus using the term even learning disability.
Okay, well, Lolita, here's the truth. We all learn different. Okay. Some people are more auditory, some people are visual, some people like to get their hands dirty. So we all have a learning difference, right?
Yes.
Not
Yes.
the same. I've started using the term learning difference to replace learning disability because, you know, I often strike the DIS out of the word disability. We all have ability, right? And unfortunately, our society does not do well with labels, right? So to take some of the stigma out of disability, I just say learning difference. And a lot of times I am replying to people, unquote, you know, quote unquote, who have learning disabilities, but it doesn't exclude the people who were never diagnosed, right? Because they still learn differently. So,
yes. And, you know, especially in our community, it's definitely a huge stigma. We don't want to talk about it. A lot of times we make excuses. We blame the child. We blame ourselves. And so that's why I've always been intrigued because, you know, it made me think back like things that I went through, you know, as a child, as learning. And I'm like, I never, maybe that's what it was. Maybe it was this, maybe it was that. But no one like really took the time to like diagnose and what did it say? Do the training and what is like if you have like a psychological test and you know reading the assessment. No one took the time to really do that, you know. And so a lot of things I had to kind of self-teach myself out of that I realized I was born with, and it was like environment, culturally based, family based. Like I would hear my other relatives speak a certain way, respond a certain way, and again, I just thought this is normal. And it wasn't really until, I mean, so I spent most of my childhood. So it wasn't really until I went to college and I'm around so many different people that are absolutely learning at different pace, coming from different cultures, different areas, different families. I was like, oh man, maybe there is something deeper there. So when you started sharing your journey, I was like, I get it. And I'm just so thankful that you're able to help someone maybe like myself that did not know. That was just like, well, maybe this is how everyone is.
Right. Well, Lolita, one of the things that I like to say, normal is not real. What is normal, right? And I think I had to embrace that along my journey, which helped me to eventually embrace my story more.
Okay. All right. So you have a parent company. You guys are getting ready to transition to just Triumph Schools.
Correct. And let me add, so the Triumph in Life has been a legal entity for over 15 years. And come January, the school, formerly known as Triumph Transition School, will have been in business for 8 years. And so the mission of our organization is to educate and empower people with learning differences, right? Learning differences so that they can embrace their or overcome their academic weaknesses to become productive members of society.
Absolutely. Oh, awesome. All right. So tell me your story. Tell me where it all began for you. Just let me say this. When did you recognize kind of diagnose yourself or recognize that you may have had a learning difference? And then of course, take us to the point where you're like, I want to help other kids like how I was growing up.
Wow. It certainly was a journey, Lolita. I almost immediately had issues in school.
Oh, wow.
Real honest with you. And it was perplexing differences because no one in the beginning was able to identify. There was something that was different, not quite right, but not wrong enough to say something is wrong, right?
That's it. Yep.
Matter of fact, initially, my kindergarten teacher wanted to hold me back in kindergarten, right? And talked about people in our community not really admitting or being in denial. And my mother, the advocate that she has always been, would not allow that, right? Her rationale was, this is a kindergarten. She knows her alphabets. She knows how to count from 1 to 100. You know, at this point, what else do you expect from a kindergarten? So I was passed on to the first grade. I eventually failed first grade. I distinctively remember when students started to be placed in reading groups, I was not placed in one. And so there, the trajectory of my education, particularly as it relates to reading, started to be, for lack of a better word, personified. You know, it started, it started to show up. I eventually, after the second year in first grade, I basically passed to the second grade on my own merit, right? Because you're talking about a child who was bright. And I had a very powerful memory. So I was able to memorize everything. And I've been in first grade for 1 year. The second time around, I made honor roll, baby, because I was memorizing everything.
Right.
And because I was a bright child, I just kind of, just like I said, confuse people. You know, I'm not sure why she's not doing this, but she's able to do this, right? And so, like you said, stop, let's dig deeper. And so, time I got to third grade, I was actually passed on to fourth grade. And my report card literally said passed, moved on, not like passed on your own merit, right? And so by the time I got to fourth grade, my fourth grade teacher was the one who eventually identified the fact that she thought something more needed to be done to address the fact that I was not reading at grade level. And for a long time, especially as an older child, I resented that, right? Nobody wants to be labeled. No one wants to be placed in special education. But now I am so grateful. I am so grateful for that teacher. And once again, you know, I was raised in a county where sometimes, especially with the African American community, things were not done out of a good heart, you know. Even now, you know, there is an over-representation of little Black boys in special education. And so, but for me, and I know now, it needed to have happened, and it changed the trajectory of not only my education, but my entire life. Now, was it smooth sailing? No, baby. I had some bumpy roads. It was pretty cool in elementary being in special education. You know, you were in the small class. You got to do a whole lot of things. I wouldn't say it wasn't rigorous, but it wasn't stressful. So
you appreciated that.
Yes, my teacher loved, or my teacher, because I only had one other than the PE teacher at the time. She loved on us. She poured into us. I remember working with her one-on-one a lot. But by the time I got to middle school, I started to see the difference between myself and my gen ed peers. And as a result of that, definitely a lot of self-esteem issues, to be really honest with you. And just because of who I am as a person, there has always been this spirit of work hard, you know. And I got to the point where I realized I no longer wanted to be in special education or associated with so-called kids who learn slower, you know. I didn't want to be picked at or, you know, singled out because I was with the special education teachers. So I threw myself into my work, and it was the hard knock life, to be real honest with you. But I studied a lot. And thank God I still had some awesome teachers. And by the time I got to, let's see, 8th grade, I had been mainstream back into general education. And the difference, we don't hear that word mainstream anymore because it's been replaced with inclusion. But the difference is mainstream, you earned your seat in gen ed. Inclusion says, I have a right to be here, right? And both of those are two powerful things. However, sometimes, like I heard an educator say today, I am definitely for inclusion, but not inclusion for inclusion's sake. But that may be a whole nother story for a whole nother time. So continue on with my journey. So by the time I got to high school, I was in gen ed classes, and by the time I was a junior, I was even taking some academic classes. And I was an honor roll student. I was an athlete, and pretty much I had put special education behind me. Now, a lot of people may think, okay, so was miraculously, did she not have a reading disorder anymore? No, I just so happened to had been able to develop a lot of strategies. I definitely had improved my reading to a point where I could comprehend or decode well enough on my own to be able to get through the content of my work. But the issue was still there. Just as to this day, I read very well, but you would not get me too often to read anything cold orally in front of anybody.
But I'm the same way. I was never, diagnosed with a reading disorder delay, but I was the same way. And you know me from college, and I did a lot of public speaking. I've always done public speaking. But once I realized, like, oh, wait a minute, there is a problem here, or maybe somewhat of a delay with just speaking and reading, then you like you said, you work smart, you work hard. When you're a hard worker, you're like, I'm determined. I'm going to get through this. And so I would do the same thing, like prepare, prep. I would not be in chapel, anywhere speaking without some preparation. Like, don't ask me impromptu. But I had to self-teach myself because, like you said, you didn't want to be part of the stigma. Now, I was never placed in special education because, again, no one recognized it because I could speak intelligently around some of those issues that I recognized.
And I think that's the bad rap that special education gets sometimes because it's such a broad continuum. It is a huge umbrella where a lot of different academic challenges or delays live, but the majority of people, or even kids to this day who are in special education, are kids with average or above average intellectual ability. So sometimes people conflate reading with intelligence, and that's not the case. You can be a brilliant person and not be able to decode a word. Dyslexia researchers now know that it is in the DNA, or it's passed down. And
that's what I realized, yes, because it came from one of my parents, and then I recognized through my aunts, through some uncles, but it wasn't until I was older that I was like, oh, and then I started seeing it through one of my children, and I was like, immediately, but it's lessened, like it's not as strong, that DNA. But I recognized it when my child was like 2. I was like, wait a minute, I see it. I recognize this. So I started working really hard to try to help her overcome that. But I'm glad you mentioned the whole DNA thing. Some things were just, like I say, your personal brain, you're born with that. However, understand that it's something you can still overcome. You can utilize it to better yourself, but just having the power, that empowerment, I think that's essential. To have the empowerment to know, hey, you know what? I can use this for a better good for myself and for others.
And exactly. And that was work. Okay. You hit the nail on the head. Use it for empowerment, but it was definitely easier said than done, because by the time I got to college, I wanted nothing to do with education, period, as far as like teaching and so forth. My trajectory was a law. Okay. You couldn't tell me that I wasn't going to be a teacher. However, things transpired, and someone suggested that I minor in education just as something to fall back on in case I didn't go right away into law school. And I'm a logical person, and that makes sense, right? Okay. So something happens, you can teach history for a little while, and then off to law school you go. Well, I had a life transforming experience in that first education class, And God spoke to me so clearly through the story of Enos Cosby. And if you guys don't know who that is, that was Bill Cosby's son. And I know everybody remembers that episode of Theo, in which
Yes,
he found.
yes, dyslexia, yes.
And that was loosely based off of Bill Cosby's son. And this was at the time of Enos's death. And that's when I really first learned about Bill Cosby's son and the fact that he had struggled in school forever to eventually find out it was due to being dyslexic. And here's where I got convicted.
Okay.
This man dedicated his life to telling his story, particularly to low-income areas, and his goal was to build schools for students in those areas that were dyslexic. And I became so convicted when I learned that story, because clearly God showed me, I graced you. I graced you to be able to overcome this. This did not hinder you. This did not hinder your educational track. And at that time, I felt the strongest. I knew my purpose was birth. And I chose it, almost kicking and screaming. I literally said, I will be a special education teacher, but no one will ever know that I was in special education. And I held on to that up until probably maybe the first 5 years of me actually teaching special education. I eventually wrote a book. I believe it was in 2008. And that was the first time I uttered that I had a learning ability. And here's the other thing that was so powerful for me. I spent so many years hiding that. And when I finally vocalized that, it empowered me.
Yes.
It freed me.
Listen, maximize, optimize, and monetize on your personal brand. That's it. That's the story. That's it. You know, I get this. You know, I'm passionate about personal brand development. This has been part of me for many years, and God finally released me to be able to start really operating in it. I always tell people it was birthed in 2014, but established in 2021. But I had to tell my story. I still have to tell my story too, about not being afraid, not being ashamed, about my story, my journey, you know, what got me here. And so when you said, yes, you were free and you were more empowered, oh my gosh, that is so amazing. You optimize, you maximize, but it only came through telling your story.
That's it. And
it only came through telling your story. Wow.
I don't want to minimize that, particularly for anybody who is hearing this or who will hear this, who has something that they're embarrassed about or don't want to share. It is hard to get to that point to open your mouth because you're vulnerable, right? You're opening yourself up to be judged. But here's what happens. When you tell your story, others hear it. And then you start to hear other people say, me too. Oh, me too. And then you're like, wait a minute. I'm not the only one. So now you no longer feel like you're on this island by yourself. You know that this is more common than what
normalizing. Yes.
One of my dear friends now, I'm not sure what happened in the news, but I saw a post today and she talked about infertility. And she said, you know what? People do not know or understand how common this is. People don't talk about it.
They just don't talk about it.
And so, and I listen, and that's a part of my journey too. Jason and I had a time becoming pregnant, and it's a stigma. It's almost like, you know, something wrong with me. Like we were put here to reproduce, right?
Right.
Same way. But once you are able to fight through that shame that labels do to us and embrace it and tell it gives you freedom.
It gives you freedom. Yes. That is so powerful. It is. I have to just reiterate what Cindy said. If you're listening and whatever it is, it doesn't have to be a learning disability, whatever it is that you feel like, you know what, I'm ashamed. Tell your story. That's the first step. I tell people all the time, even if you're not ready to go live and do a video about your story, write it down.
Amen.
Write yourself a note. Write your children a note. Tell somebody your story because you got to get that off of you.
Mm-hmm.
You got to get that release. If Cindy never told her story, I would have never reflected back on that little girl that struggled with reading as well, because it was something I put in the back burner. I had scholarships at college, dean's list. I made it. But when she told her story many years after I left college, I was like, wow. And then it came back to unfold because it came through my child. It reminded me, hey, remember? Mm-hmm. So this is something, like you said, DNA, genetic, but you don't have to be ashamed. Mm-hmm. And I think when we empower ourselves, we can empower others.
Yep.
I was still walking around with that shame, that guilt, that what's wrong with me, and especially because no one really took the time. I didn't have that teacher that took the time to pour into me. I just, like you said, you have passing grades, you're passing along, but I knew there was something. I knew there was a disconnect, and I couldn't get it from home because it was a disconnect there. So it wasn't until I was an adult child that I realized that there was something there, but I still had that stigma of, no, it can't be me. I don't want to talk about it. I remember sharing with like a few people. I had like, before Circle and all that, came about, I had a small circle that knew, and they would help me and prepare me and prep me. Yeah. A small circle, a very small, that I felt that I could trust, with this stigma. Okay. And, but when I left college, it was like, who's going to help me? Who's going to know? Who can I confide in? Who can help me? Because, you look at the cover, you're just like, oh, there's no way.
Look, she's pretty. She's speaking. She's in SGA and doing all of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I think I, couldn't understand, because I was able to do that. And I was able to, God gave me, an empowerment to speak, and gave me a gift, and people would listen, and I would draw people in with my voice. But then people didn't know what I was working on in the background to get to that point. They didn't know what I was covering up, what I would flip around to replace this word with that word, and just, so much. And so, like I said, 8 years, I graduated from college in 2002. So here you are almost 8 years later sharing your story in 2008. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I would have never known, Cindy, and then all these years have now transitioned. We're in 2021. And it always sat with me like, wow, there is help, but you told your story. I have to go back to, you told your story. Before the platform of IG even existed, right. Facebook was barely around at that time in 2008, but you took advantage of whatever platform you had and you told your story. And again, even if it impacted one person, which it impacted me, hey, it's not in vain. I never forgot it. And so it gave me the courage to keep digging, keep working. And again, when I realized that, hey, my child may have this, let me dig, let me work hard, let me explain to her the importance of why we want to overcome this. And I thank God that, it regressed. It wasn't as strong as my parent or my grandmother or grandfather, like wherever it came from. Like I always sit and wonder, because I'm analytical, like where did it start? And how can we go back? We kind of changed this. But we can't. We can just move forward and just keep telling our stories and keep working hard. So, I mean, oh my gosh, amazing. People are loving this. This is amazing. I appreciate you just being transparent tonight and just sharing and going deeper. I didn't know that it went back, to kindergarten.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Look, I'm still thinking about it. And my mama said, who fails kindergarten? She's like, and it won't be my baby.
Oh, no, that's right. But it's so interesting. I remember being in school, maybe even high school, and it was kids who were like, yeah, I failed kindergarten. And I used to be like, yeah, how you do that? But hearing your story, maybe it was some of that foundational. And you talked about reading, right? I remember we were in Cleveland Public Schools, and definitely at the time, the school systems were not as prominent as even the suburban schools, okay? But I remember being pulled out of the class, a group of us, to go to like a special reading class.
Wow.
And, but I didn't, they don't tell you like, oh, we're going to help you a little bit. I was just like, okay. I just knew during reading circle time, I wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And then we moved to the suburb, and they didn't pull me out. And then we moved to another suburb. They didn't pull me out. So that's where I think it stopped, where I knew there was something. However, because I didn't get pulled out of class any longer, I thought, well, maybe, maybe it was something else. Maybe it wasn't a delay. Maybe I didn't really need the help, because they never would say, we're putting you in this class to give you a little extra attention. It was maybe about 6 of us, but it was always, in elementary, you had a circle time on the carpet. And we went to another class.
Right.
And you don't understand sometimes things you're going through and experiencing as a child. You just remember it. Like I can see myself in that classroom right now that maybe had a seats of 30, but it was only 6 of us in there doing a reading time. And now I'm putting 2 and 2 together, like they pulled me out for a reason. But we never talked about it at home.
Right.
We never talked about it. So it really took many, many years later for me to really just realize, oh my gosh, there was something there.
Yeah. And really, like you hit the nail on the head with the importance of telling our story and embracing it, because now you didn't have to go through what whomever in your family went through. Now your child is not going to have to through what what you went through, and so forth. Even now I am monitoring Miss Lucy a lot, because we're seeing signs of brilliant in math now. I call it a mathematician. She's 4 years old and she's adding, and so but honey, we put the shoes on the wrong foot every time. 9 is a 6 and the 6 is a 9, the D is in something else. And at first it scared me. But it reminded me, you know how to deal with this. You're ready for this. And so even she will not have to trot the road that I have. And, if it turns out that, her issues are so profound that, she needs a label, I'm not afraid of it. We know that help is out there, and also know it does not have to hinder her academically, especially when we do the work up front.
We do the work up front. And I applaud you, because that's what it takes. It takes a parent to sacrifice and be selfless, and and not say, I'm going to ignore this. This is not happening again. But you say, you know what? I have the opportunity. I have the exposure. I have the training. I have the experience. I walked this journey. So there's no reason. And that's exactly how I grabbed hold of Liana as well. I was like, wait a minute, I see it. And it was so hard to, only a mother at that time could recognize it, because she was so young. So she wasn't reading, she was a toddler, but I heard it in her voice. And I was like, uh-oh, it's here. It like popped up, here it is. And I immediately was like, no, we are not going to go through this again, because I know better. I recognize it. Even if someone didn't recognize it in me, I knew something. Like you said, when you got to middle school and high school and you saw the general education versus special education, I knew that there was something different. And so I said, I'm not going to allow either one of my children or any child, if I have any control, to go through that and get the help that they need. We do have a question, Cindy. I want to get to that. Having 2 young kids, how do you assist the parents with identifying and educating themselves about these different learning challenges?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Especially now, everything is just kind of dependent on where you are. Now, the good thing is schools are being more aware, and sometimes the school isn't aware. But if you as a parent, like you said early on, you just felt like something is not right, then you have to bring it up to the school, and you have to not let your cries go unheard. You can ask for testing. That is your absolute right. Now, a lot of times I hear parents say, well, I talked to the teacher and they said, you know what, just give it time. Listen, I see too many students whose parents gave it time, and they're in middle school not being able to read. It's for absolute legal right, if your child is in public education, for your child to be assessed. Do not be afraid of that. Some people are afraid of being put into special education, but that's after the assessment, and you still can deny that. but you have a right for your child to be assessed, to be looked at deeper so that you can see where issues are arising, particularly as it relates to reading. Sometimes we think reading simply equates to being able to look at words and pronounce them. No, it is much deeper than that. There's like 5 different components to reading.
Yeah, exactly.
And all of those things are not synced. Then you start to get a kid who eventually might have a deficit in that area. But if you're not trained, the only way you are going to be able to say with 100% certainty is to ask for that testing.
Right. And you're absolutely right about that, because I know, again, we have the stigma, again, just within our community, the community of color, minorities, we just really have this stigma because we already have, we come from this, stigma background with racism and slavery and so forth. So we just feel like we don't need to be beat up by anything else. We don't need to be told that we are undervalued, undereducated. So we really, are hesitant to move forward with that. But like you said, it's to protect us.
Lolita, let me put it this way, okay? Because I will say, first of all, having a learning difference has no color. It occurs in other cultures.
It does.
I don't see it as much in the Asian culture. It ain't that it ain't there. We just make it as much. But you have people in other cultures who cheat to get their child the services that comes from being labeled with some type of learning difference. That's how powerful these services are. We don't always understand what power we get if our child truly needs them. We have people in jail right now who finished their sentence because they paid someone to lie about their child having some type of issue, and when they went to college, they got extended time, or they got extra or extended time for doing whatever.
Right. Might have like a 504 plan.
People are paying money for this, and your child deserves it based on, just their learning style, their learning difference. Why would you be in such denial that you wouldn't get that child hurt? And I think one of the most heartfelt things to me, or hurtful things, is because, and I've been there, right? Is that people do not understand the emotional impact that is associated with not being able to read, with not being able to do math. And when you don't understand why that deficit is there or where it's coming from, you grow up as just as a traumatized adult. And if you believe me, I have a YouTube channel, and you can find it. If you go to YouTube and say Cindy Lumpkin, look for the video that I did on dyscalculia, and that's a math disorder. I have so many grown adults that have come and said, you know what? I struggled through school. I got kicked out of college. No one ever identified this. This is what I have. Do you know how many jobs I lost? And it's like, it's hurtful. But when you're able to own why those differences are there, I said, it gives power. And then when you realize that there are millions of other people who are going through the same thing, you don't feel like a sore thumb anymore. And that's the power of embracing it. There are so many, once again, well-meaning parents, right? And at the end of the day, we parent the way that we see best, right? And I can't tell you how to parent your child and vice versa. However, Lolita, I tell parents, like, you got one shot. And when you meet someone like me or you who are, for lack of a better word, probably higher intellectually functioning, right? We can power through stuff. Well, there are some people who can't power through. Or maybe you had the parent who hired the tutor, who kept the child at the table, and they made it through high school. But then you sent them on to college, and you ain't at the table no more. There is no tutor now. Now they got to sink or swim, and they don't understand why this is so hard for me. So now they're feeling dumb. But they have no reason. They can't go back and relate to, well, this is hard because my brain works this way. You get what I'm saying? And that is the importance of us, or of parents, recognizing issues in our children and then addressing those issues, and then giving our children the words to address the issue themselves, because we don't need traumatized adults coming back saying, you know what, I always felt different, but no one said XYZ. And I cannot tell you, once again, because I have verbalized my story, I can't tell you how many people who have come back to me and say, you know what, I think that was me too. They passed me along, or my mama helped me and helped my work and so forth. And, you know, and a lot of people don't turn out like us. A lot of people.
It's true. I mean, you have to have, you know, you got to have that will. If you don't have that willpower, that determination, you know, like they say, oh, she got heart. He has heart. If you don't have that, it is easy to just get, they say, fall into the cracks, because you don't have that team, that support, that circle. And we know there's a lot of information available now to, you know, assist parents, assist pupils, you know, students, that they can get information for themselves. However, I think, Cindy, the still issue is the stigma. Like, how do we erase that? How do we erase or minimize that so people can tell their story? Because we're going back to personal brand development. How do you use your personal brand? How do you overcome that? Because it's 2021. I mean, you know, kids are still like, oh yeah, they're in special education. You know, they do this, they do that. They're still talking like that. They're still, you know, almost referring to them like they are aliens. You know, there's something just so different about them. You know, you still hear it. You know, I've heard people say that. Then you got all these, you got these different disabilities that sometimes people don't consider a disability or a difference. You know, we didn't hear about autism growing up. We didn't hear about ADHD. It was just, oh, they just bad.
Yep.
Oh, they just
beat the tails, right? Beat them to the city.
That's it. That's it. So we have so many differences and stuff out here now that we start.
I'm sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
The word normalize.
Normalize it.
We still haven't normalized it. You know, this big thing in mental health community, in the mental health community, where now, as culturally, we saying Black people normalize mental health conditions.
Right.
Normalize that, you know, a lot of people are depressed or anxious. You know, get help. It's okay to go to church and praise the Lord, but it's okay to get help. There's nothing different.
Right.
We normalize it. There are children born every day who will not meet what the schools call is the standard. And that's okay.
Yep.
Now, does that mean you sit on that information? No. It's a whole nother road. There's a journey. You have to prepare yourself. You have to prepare your child, but normalize it. And show your child, once again, and I can just relate this culturally. We keep saying Black people need to see themselves in print, right? We know when we read books to our children, they don't need to just see Caucasians or Asians or, you know, whatever else. They need to see themselves, right? Because if they can see themselves, then one day they can arrive at that. Well, we need to, when we realize that our children have issues, show them themselves. Find adults who have been successful, who has traveled the road that our children are trying. Listen, that was probably one of the reasons I had held on to my story for so long, and that I was so ashamed. I still can't tell you anybody when I was growing up that I thought or knew that had some type of disability, and then went on to still live a fulfilled life.
You don't hear about that.
Right?
It's either
So we
it's either you.
And I'm so sorry, because this is the part that
I know you're passionate.
I often feel like I am on this long road, right? We have to seek out people, and nowadays we're out here. It's just whether or not you're going to seek them out and whether or not you're going to support them people. I can tell you now, there's a pastor here in Atlanta who has autism.
Okay.
And he is powerful. I met an actor in Mississippi. He actually came up and spoke to us 2 years ago. Black man who was the epitome of the child who couldn't read in 3rd grade. And he was one of those statistics that said that got caught up in that pipeline.
The pipeline, yep.
Right? He did. He recognized real early, I don't do school well. But he was a good looking guy. He could talk. He was intelligent. Just don't put a book in front of him, right? And he realized he wasn't good at school, but he realized he was real smart on them streets, selling them drugs, right? He could do that real good and made that money, baby, until it all came down on him. Got put in jail, got arrested about it, and he really started opening up. Man, why you here? What else I'm gonna do? I can't read. I can't go and get a job. How else was I gonna take care of myself? Someone taught him how to read. Taught someone while he was in jail. He met someone. They taught him how to read. He got out of jail. He continued to tutor with that person. He actually got nominated for an Emmy Award, and he is in two. I wish I kept up with Tyler Perry more often, but he is in Tyler Perry's more recent movie or television sitcom. I'll figure information out and give it to you. But his name is Amir Baraka. But we don't hear that. Why? Because honestly, the Black community does not embrace it. We do not give our own a platform. When I asked him to come to Atlanta to speak, sadly, there wasn't as many people there that should have been there. But the first thing he said was, man, I am so happy to look out and to see my own people. He said, too often when I'm asked to come and speak, it's in front of an audience that don't look like me.
Don't look like me.
And see, and when I told you that, you know, this dyslexia thing don't have a color, right? So he's not going to withhold what he got just because it's only the white people seeking him out. He wants to be here for the African American community, but we're not there.
Show up.
There you go.
You gotta show up.
Until we seek those people out who are doing the work and support those people. See, now I don't want to take over your IG and say, listen, y'all need to look triumphant life out up now, because we're a 501c3 and you know it's a tax donation. But you know what? In order for me to continue to do what I do, in which the majority of the students I work with are kids who are from low income backgrounds, kids who normally go to a private education. And Lolita, like, we see children who are in middle school not learning to read come to us, and they are making academic gains of a year or more in one school year. And when I tell you, listen, you know me, my organization runs on a budget like that. If I'm able to do that with minimal resources, what more can I do when Black families rise up and say, we need another option for our students and our community. Let's rally around this organization. Let's go get our churches in which we are paying our money to, which are closed every day except for Wednesday and Sunday. Let's and Pastor, I pay my tithes. We got to do more to help our community. Until we really realize the only way we're going to eradicate poverty is get to this reading issue. A lot of times, poverty and low reading is connected together. What else you want them to do when you're in a world that you have to read? You know,
you got to read. Reading comprehension is important. I mean, that's why I always tell my children, if you can now, you know, my son is a brilliant reader. You know, I'm thankful. I said, thank you, Lord. Thank you that he doesn't have this. You know, he didn't struggle with that. And so he has his other areas, you know, but that in particular, I mean, that God knows, you know, that as his mother, I needed my heart, you know, blessed and full with that. So when we go to a parent-teacher conference and they're like, oh, yeah, you know, he's reading 2 grade levels above. And I'm like, won't you do it?
To you, that is awesome.
Won't you do it? Won't you do it? You know, and he's desired, I mean, from an infant, okay, younger than Jackson, younger than your baby, from an infant to read, always had a book in his hand, always. And still now he'll get distracted by having a book in his hand. And, you know, I posted about that. But I say all that to say, I always tell them, you know, you got to learn how to read. You really do, because it's in everything. You know, you may be able to get past on some science things, you know, scientific things. You may be able to get away with some areas of math. Reading is everywhere. Everywhere you go, you have to read. So even when I task them with, go get me this, what's on the back of this box? Read this. And they're like, huh? You have to read everything. And it's not that, of course, they can't do it, but I'm just imparting the normalization of you have to read. You have to read, whether it's something on the back of a box, whether it's a school newspaper, whether it's an assignment, You have to read. So you're absolutely right that a lot of times we can't move up, we can't progress because of the lack of reading comprehension, understanding, connecting the dots. And then you mentioned there's layers to reading. I'm not an educator. I'm not a trained educator. You know, sometimes people say, oh, you know, you'll be a great teacher. I'm like, you know what? I just poured into my kids because of the little girl in me, what happened to me. And I wanted to make sure it never happened to anyone else in my bloodline. But I'm not trained as someone like yourself and other educators that can see those signs. And like you said, layers. I didn't even realize there were layers, you know, to reading. All I knew was there was a delay. There was some disconnect there. And so when you mention the connection with poverty and reading, we have to look at reading as education, but we don't. Especially now, everything is just, we click a button. Mm-hmm. But we have to connect that because there is a detriment. We have to connect the normalization of, you know what, I learned differently. We have to connect that. We have to embrace it. We have to love it. But we're so taught, like, I mean, I'm sure you can, and others that are watching, so many people that are like, not my child. Not my child. Not me. And then, like you said, when they become adults and they feel like I can't make it in corporate America, I can't function. And then they do other things that seem to be easier, but yet it's dangerous. And then they end up, you know, behind bars. So very powerful statement of connecting the reading to educational reading to dismantling poverty is very essential. So I'm so glad you mentioned that. Awesome. So I don't want to hold you much longer. We're getting to that 8 o'clock hour. I don't know if there's any other questions, but I think this has been a very powerful segment. I'm so excited about the change that so many people are going to experience just from taking this time out on this evening to partake in this discussion regarding personal brand development, and specifically our topic tonight on learning differences, learning disabilities. This has been a very powerful segment. Cindy, can you leave us with just a word of encouragement to help us as parents, even just community aunties and uncles and fathers, on how to move past this, how to move through this, not even past it, how to move through this, how to move through learning differences so that we don't have to continue a generation after generation, community after community of the stigma. Do you have any words of encouragement to help us tonight?
And I want to be very thoughtful, I guess, in what I say. And I think, you know, having spoken to a friend recently about some issues with her child, I think the main thing is we have to separate who we are as parents from the struggles that our children have. And sometimes we beat ourselves up. And like you said earlier, we blame. And sometimes we feel less of a parent because our child is struggling, you know? And we have to get over that. We have to remember that our children are their own unique and different selves. And we have to be extremely vigilant with their education. Like when you see something, when you feel like something isn't right, you have to ask questions. We have to be so on top of our children's education. And, you know, teachers are awesome. And I think they, as public school teachers, private school too, I think they do what they can, right? They're hard in the right place. But no one knows a child better than the parent. And if you feel like something is not right, don't keep going to parent-teacher conference after parent-teacher conference with them saying, oh, such and such is doing well, or such and such are, you know, making A's and B's. Because like I told my friend, this day and age, a A and a B don't mean what you think it means. A lot of times, you know, we have this new term in education, well, maybe not so new, differentiation. And instead of differentiating the work so that it can be at a level that our children can access it where they are, we differentiate the grade. And that's the easy way out. We give the child a B or C, and at some point the child stops learning. And so it's like, now you have a sixth grader still reading on the second grade. Well, how do your child get from the second grade to the sixth grade and there's no progress? And when there's no progress, then you have to ask questions, and you have to see beyond the reading grade. Well, how is his vocabulary? What grade is that? How is his comprehension? Where is that, at? How is his decoding? How is his fluency? We have to ask those questions. And if for any reason that you feel like your child is not progressing at the speed and the rate that you think they should, ask for that testing. It doesn't mean, you figure out what you're going to do once you get the test back in your hand. It doesn't automatically mean that they're going to put your child in special ed. It could, but you still have a right to deny that, right? But the only way we're going to get over this is for us to be vigilant and to be open to what the facts are. And we have to get to a point where our own emotions have to be taken away, and we look at our children as their own individual, unique self, and we work with them where they are. And we understand that even if they're in sixth grade and we're at second grade level, the school isn't going back teaching them how to read. So you got to figure out how you go back to the second grade to bring them back up, because they're still teaching them content. So you might have a sixth grader, but they teaching them content sixth grade. So the question you got to ask, if they're still learning content, I think you said something about a foundation. To me, that's like pouring cement or trying to build on a cracked foundation. The more you pour into it, all it's doing is going down in the little cracks. You're not continuing to build up. So it's us to make sure that the new information our children is getting and sticking is to go back and fix the crack. And you have to go back to the second grade and move on up. So I hope, hopefully that kind of addressed that question and inspire parents to know that if you are dealing with a child who is learning differently, who is not getting it, you're not alone. Join some of the Facebook groups. There are different Facebook groups out. I know here in Georgia, there's one called Decoding Dyslexia. You will see tons and tons of parents. I just read a post from one mama the other day who said, my child is brilliant, but the school system is not addressing his need. And I will mortgage my house to get him in a school that's going to address him and that's going to build his self-esteem. Now, maybe we all can't go that far, right? We might not go that far. Some parents pour their kids out of homeschool. We might not be able to do that, but we can rally around people in our community who's doing the work. And when you pour into them, then we create spaces where our children can get the help they need without hopefully the financial burden. And I think going into this new year, that's my mindset. I really want Triumph to become the parent school of many parts throughout the state of Georgia. And I want to show people that education can be done, and it doesn't take a whole bunch of money, but it takes some people who are going to roll up their sleeve and help and come together. So you can definitely look for more about that. I definitely will be talking more about this new vision that God has given me for Triumph in Life and Triumph School. And I'm just really excited about it.
Absolutely. I am so excited. And for those of you who are still on with us, please follow the LD Educator on IG. And also, like Cindy mentioned, you can look her up on YouTube, Cindy Lumpkin. She's on Facebook. She's everywhere. And as you can hear, she is passionate and well-trained and educated in special differences, special needs. Again, you want someone like Cindy on your side. You know, part of the reason why I selected her again, because of my personal story, you know, she spoke to the little girl in me many years ago. And I know that at least one person has been watching us tonight. I know that your life is being changed because of hearing her story. And so when you guys, those of you who follow the Personifi group, again, we focus on personal brand development. And one of the things we encourage, clients and just those who follow us to tell your story. Tell your story. As Cindy's mentioned earlier, it's not only going to set you free, it's going to set other people free, but you'll also be able to maximize. You'll be a better person, a better you. You may think, well, I've mastered this. I have my MBA in this, my law degree, CPA, whatever it is. But if you're not using your personal brand, you are holding yourself back. You are not at your maximum ability unless you are instilling that personal brand. And so the story that she went through, the journey I went through, and the journey that you're going through is part of your personal brand, and it's part of your story. And you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised how many doors will open up once you tell your story, once you maximize on your story. I want to leave everyone just with holiday blessings. Be safe on the road if you're traveling this holiday season. Thank you again, Cindy, for taking the time just to share with us and pour into us. Again, this is the Art of Using Your Personal Brand series, and this is our episode 3. We'll be back again after the new year. So again, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, happy Kwanzaa, happy New Year, and we will see you guys in the new year.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Cindy. Bye.